Okay, we're good? We're ready? Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedals Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Safari Podcast Zoo, YouTube thing, crazy, wild bandwagon. It's great to have you.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
First and foremost, I just want to say, before anybody gets any great ideas to rip into the fact that I'm wearing a different colored shirt in the intro than in the rest of the video, I just want to say, I know this episode that you're about to watch was actually, crazy fact, filmed yesterday.
I don't like where this is going.
I completely forgot to do my little, my clappy, hey guys, welcome back, bandwagon, crazy. So you are getting the red shirt for the intro and the green shirt for the rest of the episode. So I'm aware that it's different. So now we can cut to the rest of the episode. So let's cut to the whole point of why you're watching the show. Today, we are once again continuing the incredible, the amazing, the educational and informative mini-series of 5 mistakes and 5 tips. You guys have seen the title of the episode, so you know who's going to be on the show, but I still want to say that I'm very excited that Jeff Ellis Worldwide is going to be on the show, and we're going to be discussing his 5 mistakes and his 5 tips he has for people starting off their audio bandwagon crazy wild journey. I feel like there's not much more I can add on top of that, so please give a very warm Safari welcome to Jeff Ellis Worldwide.
Yay!
Yes!
How's it going?
Good. How's it going by you?
Good. I'm just looking at the stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm a #1 fan of the show.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'm honored. And thank you for tuning in every week on Wednesday.
Oh, every week.
Every week at 10 a.m. PST. Thank you.
Yeah.
So before we kick off today's episode, let's hear who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
I am a music mixer, an engineer, and I'm here in East West Studios in LA. Yeah, I mean, I've dedicated my whole life to mixing music, and that's why I'm here in this beautiful studio today, because I worked my ass off my whole life to get here, and now I have my dream job. So that's me.
That was amazing. Woo!
Shortened version of it, but yeah.
Today, guys, we are continuing the magical, amazing mini-series of 5 mistakes and 5 tips. So it'll divide into 2. 1, what are some mistakes that you've made in your audio journey that you've learned from? And then we can dive into mistakes you see in producers and engineers that are starting out.
I have some notes here. My first mistake is, I'm going to kind of talk about there is a phase in my life where I transitioned to just being a full-time mixer, and I'm going to talk about the mistakes that I was making during that phase when I was just focused on mixing, okay? So the first major mistake that I was doing is I did not focus enough energy into the acoustics of my studio. And I've come to find throughout my career, it's like, if your studio and your monitoring setup is not just a profoundly neutral reference, basically flat, you're wasting your time. An entire mix is built off of a whole bunch of different elements. And if you're hearing anything inaccurately, you're wasting your time. And I just, there's kind of like a general vibe with music producers and mixers and stuff where it's almost like, oh, we'll do the thing and then we'll check it in headphones and we'll check it in the car. And I know my studio's not perfect, but it's really not that hard to just invest a lot of effort up front into getting everything flat, getting the acoustics right, doing a great speaker calibration, getting a pair of monitors that are very neutral. And once you do that, you save hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and thousands of hours on the back end. The way I have it set up now in my studio, I don't have to car test anything. I don't have to listen on headphones. I don't have to ever worry about while I'm mixing, I'm going to go a little bass light because I know my studio has this weird bump around 60 hertz or whatever it is. I don't have to do any of that. That's just weighs down your brain and gets in the way of creativity. So people don't realize, because almost no one is ever working in an acoustic environment that's great. People don't realize how amazing it is to not ever have to worry about any translation. And it's really not that hard to get there nowadays with how good speaker calibration is. You just have to be a little bit diligent about that up front. So that's the first big mistake I made. Okay, number two.
Number two, y'all. Number two.
Hardest one. This is the hardest one for me. This is the hardest mixing discipline ever. My second biggest mistake is listening too loud. And especially if it's a good song, it's so much more fun to listen loud. But the problem is the second you go loud at all, your body has some biological response that just EQs your ears. Like all of a sudden something in your ear clamps down and you're not hearing anything relatively flat anymore. So anytime I would be mixing, it would be going okay. Then I get a little insecure with my mix. I'm like, oh, maybe if I turn it up, it'll sound cool. And now I'm listening loud. And then you start fighting that battle. And then like once you go loud, you're kind of done for the day in terms of being able to EQ anything properly. Also, there's something called Fletcher-Munson's equal loudness contours, where basically there's a certain volume where we perceive frequencies pretty flat. Once you get really loud, you perceive frequencies differently. Once you're too quiet, it's different, but it's kind of flat around a certain volume. And I trained myself through sheer discipline to kind of have one mixing volume almost all of the time. And I know exactly where it is on my console. It's -9 with the dim button in. And every day I mix a song at that volume. And once you get used to sticking around the same volume most of the time, you start to realize that you can learn the parameters of this one volume game really well. Whereas mixing loud, it's like the parameters of the game are completely different. The bass gets more overwhelming when you're louder. So it's when you're like jumping around a lot, not only are you EQing your ears, but the rules of the game is changing all the time. So it gets confusing, right? So if you mix 100 songs on one volume, you start to feel, and that volume is set to be kind of the Fletcher-Munson volume that's most flat, and you can look up what that is. You start getting to a place where it's like, oh, I know how a mix should sound at this volume because I'm always there all the time. But back in the day, I would just crank it, devastate my ears, do a mix, and the next morning, the frequencies would be way off because of multiple reasons. So that was my second biggest mistake. And that was really hard to overcome because it's hard to not touch the volume knob.
How long did it take you to get to a point of like, I'm disciplined in this? Like you were able to say that confidently.
You know what happened is I started getting so overwhelmed with work. There was no other option but to be more disciplined, because every day I would get too loud and ruin my ears and ruin the mix because I got too loud. I was kind of forced into having to adhere to the discipline because I wouldn't hit deadlines. So it was excruciating for me. And I would say maybe I got there in like my 4th year of being just like a straight mixer, you know what I mean? I was an engineer for years and years before I was like 100% a mixer, but even to this day, every once in a while, I'll go on a tilt and just be loud for no reason and just be dumb. But it took a long time to get that discipline of only listening at one volume. It's like the fun knob is sitting right in front of you the whole time, and you just want to turn the fun knob. Everything gets better when you turn the fun knob, you know what I mean? But if you can make your mix sound great on a not particularly fun volume, it's going to be fantastic when you turn it up. So it took way too long, honestly. Should I go on to number 3?
Number 3. Let's do it.
Okay, cool. Murphy is very upset. Murphy, what's up? You don't like the show? He's like growling in the background.
Murphy's not a fan of the Safari Pedals show.
I'm not. Maybe because he wasn't the model for the Dirty Dog.
True. Oh, he's probably super bitter about that.
Number 3 is like the biggest mistake for me mixing is not having a control surface. And now I have a full console here. And this was like the biggest, most positive change in my mixing I've ever made, because once I started mixing while not looking at a computer screen, it kind of freed up my brain to be way more creative. And there's something about like, if you can see Pro Tools or Logic or whatever, Ableton in front of your face, your brain is in like technical mode and you're seeing this production. But if you turn away from the screen, like I have my screen here and I can turn over here and press play, all of a sudden now it's a piece of music, right? And my brain, you can literally feel it. It shifts into this creative mode where now I'm hearing and feeling things that I can't when I am looking at a screen. Now, before I mix this way, I grew up on PC gaming. Like I was like a computer mouse guy. Like I would be like, you don't need that. That's like, whatever. I mixed up all these songs on a mouse and keyboard. It's fine. Everybody's doing, all these top mixers are doing it. It's fine. I would have said that until I tried it and I was like, oh, wow. Not only is this way more fun, I'm hearing things completely differently. And it's saving so much time. And with a good control surface, you can fly around a session, and it puts you in a position where you can do automation so much more easily and quickly. You tend to become more of a conductor of a song, which can be extremely important for certain types of music that can be completely transformed by automation. And you'd be surprised how much a lot of my best mixes aren't about EQ or compression or this or that. It's all about the balance and the arrangement and the automation and pushing and pulling elements. They're expensive. Like this console is expensive, but if you're trying to be like the greatest mixer on earth, get a business loan. It ends up being like a car payment, and it's free. It pays for itself. Trust me, because you'll level up dramatically, and you get stuff done way faster. So it also pays for itself in that way. So
that was great. Like what inspired like the thought to get the console? Was it like a conversation or like?
Okay, so I moved into East West Studios, which is like this classic recording studio with an incredible history. And I got this room, and I was like, this room would not look right without a console. The first like reason to do is completely about aesthetics, right? So I was like, aesthetically, it's going to be gross if I'm in this classic room and there's no console. And then I was like, so let's look in it. Like at that point, I was like, I don't really need a console though, but it's just got to look great. I got to feel right. And then I started looking into what was out there, and I'd always heard that like the Avid consoles were kind of fucked and buggy and this and that. And I was like, so I just did further research. Because a lot of times if you go with like what the internet is saying, your life is just going to go to shambles. So I saw a video of someone using the S4, and I started looking into it. And it's like, wow, if like this is really does what it says it can do, that would be amazing. In fact, that would make my creative mixes way more fun and way more inspiring, and probably get done way faster. Like we're always looking for ways to be able to work faster and keep the same level of quality and keep things fun, you know? So I started doing a bunch of research, and then I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a leap of faith on this. Worst case scenario, it just looks awesome. But it turns out after the first mix I did, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And all the problems that these Avid consoles had when they first came out don't exist anymore, because there's been like years of software updates. And I feel like anybody who actually takes the jump and does it the way that I do it will come to the conclusion like, damn, I've been kind of doing it all wrong. And this is like, I'm getting the best mixes I've ever done, because now I'm finally hearing things right. And it makes sense why a lot of like the old-timey mixers, not everybody, but a lot of them do whatever they can to kind of keep their hybrid workflow with their console, because it's about the workflow that makes it sound so great. If you're trying to be like a gangster mixer, I think that it's worth some sort of business loan to get the right tools. So that's a decision that everybody's got to make for themselves. Next question.
That was great.
Thank you.
I want to be a gangster. That means, guys, I'm taking out a loan.
You're one business loan away from being a gangster at any time in your life. Always know that. I'm sure banks love giving money to music people.
I'll be like, I'll roll into the bank. Guys, I'm like a music producer, but you should invest in my console. It'll make me feel better about my work.
Yes. And then if they need a cosign for your business loan, I'll just do that.
Amazing.
Yeah, anybody who wants, what is it, the thing when someone's like credit cosigns your credit? I'll just do that for everybody.
Guys, you heard it here first.
Yeah. Okay, number 4 of the biggest mistakes is starting a mix from bad stems, right? Okay, so for whatever reason, there's like a calamity of producers that are good at making songs and have zero talent at stemming out their production to where it sounds anything like their actual production, right? And I see this all the time. There'll be a cool song made in like Ableton, and then someone's like, okay, we're gonna have this person mix it, and then they do some like automatic stem process, and then that creates a pile of junk that they don't listen to what they've made in the stems. And then they fire that off from some mixer. And then the mixer hears this pile of stem junk, but doesn't say anything because they're too timid or whatever, and starts trying to mix it off of that junk. And then they make this mix using stems that didn't contain any of the aesthetic and production value that the producer had because they messed up the stems. And then the producer hates the mix and then says this person is a bad mixer. And then that cycle continues throughout this mixer's career. So what's the way around that? Well, you kind of have to doctors take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, right? And you should do that as a mixer in such that you should not be doing harm to the production of a song the first thing that you do as the mixer is to take things that aren't the production really and start trying to mix the song. So basically you have like a decent production. Now you're going to take a giant step backwards and then mix the song from there. And I see it all the time. Unfortunately, even at the highest levels, I would say like 95%. If I'm just like, hey, send me your stems or whatever, what I will get will be something that is just like way worse than the actual production was. What I started doing back in the day, because I noticed that this was like a really, really, really like disastrous problem. If the producer was local, I'd be like, okay, come down to the studio, bring your laptop, let's make these stems together. And what I would do is I'd kind of look through whatever DAW that they were using. I would kind of look, because I ultimately wanted to get it into Pro Tools, and I would look to see what they're doing in their DAW, and see like what's on their stereo bus, because that could be highly crucial to the aesthetic of the production, right? I got to know what's going on there, because if they were just to remove all of that stuff and then start bouncing out stems, well, maybe there's a grand part of the aesthetic that's just gone now, right? And I'm supposed to like reinvent that because I'm the mixer. It's like, well, a lot of people use the stereo bus as a tool to get their drums to swing a certain way or to get a certain distortion or whatever. So it's like, you can't just like go poof, we're not gonna be aware of what it was doing or even use it anymore. I would get a sense of like what's going on in the stereo bus and then form a strategy for each particular producer or artist or whatever. Like, how are we going to take this production, move it into Pro Tools, and then mix it? Over time, I transitioned to, well, what if instead of dealing with stems, because stems ruin everything, and sometimes it's impossible to even stem out a song to where it captures the production, right? I'm like, what if I just start taking DAW sessions? And of course, that's alarming to a lot of people, because what does that mean? That means you kind of have to know every DAW that people use to some extent, to the point where you can adjust plugins and press solo and bounce basically, which isn't that hard. And then you need a lot of plugins, right? So over the years, I would take a lot of money that I would make from mixing and just every project try to buy a few more plugins. So ultimately, I had almost every plugin that people use. People like generally almost all use the same plugins, and then maybe there'll be one or two that they're using specifically to them. And if you're working with a particular producer over and over and over again, it makes sense just to buy the couple extra plugins that they are using and form a relationship with them to where they can just give you their Ableton session instead of them trying to figure out how to make a bunch of janky stems that don't end up working anyway. So what I'll do now is I'll get the DAW session. Let's say it's Ableton. I'll open it up. I have a rig in the other room that is just like totally gangstered out on plugins. My assistants will open it up, make sure it's all working, make sure that the DAW session sounds exactly like their latest rough mix that they love, to make sure everything's opening up correctly. And sometimes it's not completely straightforward, and no one said that mixing was supposed to be easy. So there's a level of work that goes into it. Then I do something called a pre-mix, right? So I'll go in Ableton. I'm not like an Ableton god, but I know how to go through the plugins and I know how to see what's on the stereo bus. A lot of times, there'll be just way too much compression or there'll be too much EQing. So I can scale back some of that stuff in Ableton, see what's going on in the stereo bus, seeing if something's adding to the aesthetic and the value of the production, or if it's taking away. Like a lot of times people will put, like way too much, like people are always putting like the SSL compressor on their stereo bus, and a lot of times it's just is like too dated type of compression. It doesn't work. They're over compressing it, so all the transients are gone. They'll put a Soothe 2 like maxed out on their stereo bus and just disabling that, the whole song gets better. Like there's some errors, but then maybe they'll have like the rabbit tape thing, like the new Safari pedals plug-in on the stereo bus, and like, oh, this is like really adding low end of the song. I'm going to make sure to keep that in the mix, and like we'll form a strategy. And then if the song seems like it can actually be stemmed out well, we'll personally stem it in a way to move it into Pro Tools so I can do it with my whole console and everything. The whole point of this whole thing is a massive amount of mixers will just take junk stems that sound nothing like the latest rough mix that was where the producers kind of had it. They'll take this junk and work from there, and then no one ever likes their mixes.
I really enjoyed everything that you just said, and like also for myself as a new producer, like those are great notes to have going forward and working with mixers.
Okay, number 5, I just wrote comparison. I think what I mean by that is I remember like early in my mixing career, I do what I would think is like a great mix, and I was like so happy with it. And then I'd listen to some mix done by Manny Marroquin or whatever, and I would be like, and it would sound nothing like that. And I would be like, oh my God, my mix sucks. And I go back and change everything. And then eventually I realized, like, wait a second. One, that was a completely different song, probably a way cooler song than what I was mixing to begin with anyway. What was right sonically for that Manny mix or whatever is not right for my mix. So why am I comparing my thing to that so much to the point where I took something that I thought was great and then all of a sudden got insecure, unraveled everything, and like tore it all down again? I would do that all the time. And then one day I just decided, you know what, this is dumb. Like this is me being insecure. I think it's nice to like maybe when you're starting out have a song that represents a very bright song and a song that represents like the very limits of how much bass can be in a song. If you're going to reference, I don't like to do too much referencing at all anymore. I think it tends to pull me in the wrong direction, but I do have kind of like every once in a while, if I need to refresh my ears, like, can I play a song that's like a bright song? Oh yeah, okay, that's what brightness sounds like. Kind of just anything beyond that, I think it's bad to do too much like comparison to other mixes, because inevitably you're going to be comparing it to some like top 40 legendary banger song. So just by the nature of that, it's going to be awesome. And then you're likely comparing that to some, like random ass song that you're mixing. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's not that. Well, of course it's not that. You know what I mean? Comparison is the theft of joy, I think someone said once. So I think I was doing too much like comparison early on with other mixers stuff instead of focusing on doing my own thing or comparing to like how the song was before I started working on it. How much improvement did I make on this song,
Comparison is the thief of good mixes.
True.
And we are now proceeding to the tips, part of our segment this evening.
Be around great art all the time, right? So if you're ultimately trying to become a mixer or a producer, honestly, at the end of the day, everything becomes about your taste and your aesthetic and all of that stuff. And you're not really like completely just born with that, right? You get that by being surrounded by great art. And my path with that was getting in an internship at one of the greatest studios on earth, which we're at right now, East West Studios. And that enabled me to be around great artists and great music. Through osmosis, it just like wears into you eventually, right? So if I was trying to do this all entirely off of YouTube, like I might learn how 1176 plugin works, but I wouldn't have ever learned why I'm using it or the aesthetic that I'm trying to bring out of a piece of music, because I never would have been exposed to anything because I was sitting in my basement. I feel like people get into the industry and they think by the very nature of being their amazing self that they just suddenly have great taste. And though that may be true to some extent, you should probably be around a lot of other inspiring artists so you can develop your taste and aesthetic. And the only way to do that is to get out of your basement and be around people. Or I mean, I guess you can get taste and aesthetic off the internet too, but just make sure you're like surrounding yourself with great art. Okay, number 2 starting out tip is accountability. You can get so far in the music business by just being like vaguely accountable, because like, this, like the nature of the music person is just being kind of lazy and not accountable, right? So by just like merely just not being that, you're such a step up above everybody else, you know? I think there's a lot of times where like I'll be feeling like, oh, I had a lazy week, and then I compare myself to like other people and how long it takes them to like handle everything or do what they said they were going to do or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm still at least like, luckily I'm like still like doing better than the average of the music industry. Right. You've probably noticed this too. Like just like the amount of people that sign up to be a runner at a studio that are just like profoundly not accountable. They don't show up on time. They don't do this. They don't like, it's crazy. It's like, it's not that hard to get ahead when your competition is like profoundly undisciplined and unaccountable and very entitled right out of the gate. You know what I mean?
It's so funny that you said that, because that's been like a theme in the other engineers that I've spoken to recently on the podcast. Okay. The bar is so low.
It was low when I started in 2009. Now the bar has like rusted and it's just literally on the ground. This is a great time to be one of the few accountable, hardworking people on earth. Should we move on to number 3?
Let's do it.
This is a good Trevor one. He's not quite as good as me at this. He's very good compared to the mean, which is be a technology master, right? So every year that goes by, I get dumber, right? And I rely on younger people whose brains are fresh to handle all the things that my brain can't compute anymore. One thing that got me ahead at East West Studios when I was going through my internship runner thing, assistant engineer, is that I was like the technology guy. I was like the only one that really knew how to keep all the hard drives synced, install the new plugins. Like I kind of knew, you know, what version of Mac OS was problematic with this new plug, whatever, like all that stuff that I used to be a master of made it so like, okay, well, I guess Jeff is the person that handles all the tech stuff at the studio, right? So many people nowadays that grow up on computers have absolutely no idea how anything works. Trevor's really good at this. Like, I was like, everything's fucked. I'm going to walk out of the room. This is great. I could be like, and then walk out of the room and then he'll fix it all, right? But how many Trevors are out there? Like so few. Like if you want to leg in on the industry, knowing technology really well is so important. For example, the battery on our camera died and Trevor's like, I have another battery. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, why didn't you plug in? And he's like, we don't have a plug. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm still the technology master, but you're pretty good at it for sure. But yeah, I was also the lighting rig guy. Like I was really good with lighting back in the day. We have this whole lighting rig in Studio One. I understood the DMX lighting code and all that stuff. We had this like robot coffee machine. I was the only person that knew how to service it, right? And I learned all this by just playing computer games growing up. In my era of PC gaming, like nothing ever worked. So you just spent all your time trying to problem solve stuff so you could get back to gaming. Like that's where I learned technology. And going into the future with all this weird AI stuff and being on the cutting edge of that, that's something starting out like, just don't be the guy that just smokes weed all day in the studio and just kind of like floats through. It's like, go like the whole like herd's going this way. Just be the person that goes the other way. Like I need people, the type of people that I hire are like really smart, great at computers, accountable. I can train everything else, you know what I mean? But just having a great at computers, accountable, trustworthy, good like person is not easy to find. Oh, number 4 is cute. It's go easy on yourself, right?
Aww.
I was way too hard on myself. I think a little bit of that is good, but if you're too hard on yourself all the time, basically you'll be in a state of paralysis and you can't act when you need to act because you'll be scared of messing up. And the chief engineer of the studio, Gary Meyerberg, back in the day when I was working here, one day he was like, Jeff, you know what? It's just music. No one's going to die. And I was like, oh, that is true, huh? And that made me more calm about everything because I'd be always like, when I first started being an assistant engineer, I was so worried about everything getting messed up and I like ruin the album and this and that. And eventually it's like, you know, it's like, it's just music, right? So relax. Should we go on to number 5?
Yes, and number 4 was very heartwarming. My heart is warm. That was great.
Good. All right, number 5 is stay healthy. This is something that Trevor is going through a health revolution right now. He's cleaned up his diet. He's playing hockey. We're getting sunlight. If you're just sitting in a dark room all day, eating trash, it's going to be impossible not to become depressed. The challenges of being an artist are many. You don't need your body working against you, right? So stay healthy. I remember right around the time I was like an assistant engineer, I started getting into being a little bit more healthy than I was before, meaning just like cleaning up my diet, trying to get out in the sun, get a little exercise. Around that same time, it had such a dramatic shift in my career because I just had way more energy. You show up to the studio with like a bounce if you don't feel like garbage, right? Ultimately, people want to be around like healthy, vibrant people. So if you like unhealthy yourself into the point where you're just like a mopey, sad person and you're depressed, like people aren't going to want to be around you. And we can't control everything, but we can control our diet and lifestyle a little bit. And that can have dramatic impacts on your energy. Like for little things like, if you have to do a lot of work, don't eat a giant burrito, right? You'll get burrito coma and then you won't be able to do the work. You know what I'm saying? Like for me, do you ever see me like come in and crush a burrito and then start mixing? No, never. Because I know my body. There's some people that can crush a burrito and have great energy. I can't for whatever reason. Burrito equals burrito coma. Then I won't even want to work. I'll just lay on the couch and be like, not do work. At this point, I'm getting a little bit older. I need a whole damn wellness routine just to get out of the house in the morning. But when you're younger, you have a little bit more flexibility. Your body can handle more toxins and what have you. But yeah, for me, I just like, man, I just want to sit in the sun, get the mitochondria, my cells all charged up. I know certain foods aren't going to make me sleepy. I'm not going to get super drunk the day before I have to mix a song. You know what I mean? Just the basics, right? Go on a nice walk with your dog. And so those were my 5 starting out tips.
That was great. And guys, this also ties into what you said before about taking accountability. So it all comes together in the end.
Truly.
See?
Truly.
It's all currently together.
Yes.
And good for you, Trevor, for taking accountability. We all applaud you.
Thank you.
Guys, so we got the 5 mistakes and 5 tips tea.
What's next? I kind of know what's next, but I don't
Since you tune in every week, you know what's coming. He knows what's up.
Yeah.
So what do you want to say to the amazing Studio Animal viewers that are watching?
Okay, so the last thing I want to say is that you got into music because it was going to be your dream job, right? Because you love music. But it's so easy to make your dream job not your dream job, right? It happens to almost everybody. That's why rock stars are killing themselves all the time. That's why literally the studio engineer is like the grumpy person archetype. It's like a cliche almost. Like a lot of people get into this because they want their dream job, but the decisions that they make throughout their career put them in a place where it's no longer their dream job, right? So along the way, there's going to be a lot of really rough days, but you do have to be aware that if you don't work hard to make this your dream job, it's going to turn into a nightmare job. That's just kind of the nature of the music industry. It's always going to try to pull you to the dark side. So you have to always be lifting yourself up and pulling yourself to the light side, right? And there was a point in my career where I realized it didn't really feel like my dream job anymore. This is a while back. I realized, okay, either I need to make some changes or I need to do something else because I can't keep going in this direction. So one day I kind of sat down and wrote like a Jeff Ellis worldwide like constitution for myself of like things that I won't do anymore. My boundaries, basically. I wrote a list of boundaries, right? And if you think that if you're like some intern at a studio, you can have this like constitutional boundary thing that people are going to respect. No, they're not. All right. This is like this, you're going to have to work it in different ways when you're on the come up, but eventually you just need to be need to be able to set some boundaries with people, or you're going to go to a place of misery, or you have to recognize, hey, I don't really like where my career is going. Have the bravery to shift to doing something else. You know what I mean? For me, there was a point where I had too many late nights in the studio. I was never around my friends. I'd be working on awesome music, but I would be like going to a session at 1 a.m. and it was like making me unhealthy. And then people would like have these weird payment policies. And I remember there's just like so much business fuckery. And I was eventually like, no more. And then I'm going to just do it my way. And if people have a problem with that, then so be it. Now, I was doing this after I'd already like made a name for myself and whatnot, and everything on my list of boundaries was all like wonderful, balanced things. It wasn't like any weird diva demands. It's just like, hey, we got to kind of work around human awake hours and this and that. When I was in music thing, like, hey, you got to pay me in this way, not dealing with the shenanigans, all basic respectful things. And almost no one ever has any problem with any of that stuff. But every once in a while, someone's going to come to you and try to like compromise your own personal boundaries. And it might lead to more money or this and that. But I always choose to be like, you know what? I'm not going to take that like low hanging fruit money. I'm going to stick to my boundaries, my Jeff Ellis constitution. And I'm going to choose the path of happiness over maybe like a quick buck here and there. And doing little things like that. And it's different for everybody. Your path is going to be different. But doing things like that is what will keep your job a dream job, as opposed to you thought you were going to have your dream job, but now you hate it. And you're like, oh my God, this wasn't what it was cracked up to be. What am I going to do now? And you start freaking out all the time. So yeah, that's my last piece of advice, is like, find a way to keep music the dream job, and don't let outside forces turn you to the dark side.
That was wonderful. That was great.
Thank you.
I took lots of mental notes. I don't know if you were able to see while you were saying it, but
you're
written
backlit
down
pretty heavily with a purple light, so
yes, the purple light absorbed
yeah.
all the ideas. They're now in the purple light.
Episode 20.
Episode
Big
20, guys, the big 2-0. Thank you so much to Jeff Ellis Worldwide and Trevor and Murphy.
You're welcome.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah, I'll be back for episode 100.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm making a constitution. Jeff
Okay,
Ellis Worldwide episode.
Yeah, that's in my constitution as well.
Well, now it's in my new constitution.